My father's voice cracked over the phone, not with emotion, but irritation. "You need to come home next weekend," he ordered, the same tone he'd used when I was 16. But this time, instead of the familiar heaviness settling into my chest, something hot and electric shot through me. "You moved to Oregon without telling us," he continued, voice tightening with each word. "How dare you move without telling your family? What's your address?" The question hung between us like a trap. 6 months of silence after I'd packed everything I owned into a U-Haul and disappeared. 6 months without a single call, text, or email asking where I'd gone. Not even on my birthday. "Do you even remember my last address?" I asked, my voice steadier than the trembling in my fingertips. The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know. "My name is Nora. I'm 29 and a cybersecurity engineer. This is the story of how I became visible by disappearing. I'd been the extra in our family portrait for as long as I could remember. Background acceptable only when useful. Patrick was the sun, the center, the reason the camera flashed. I was just there. The honor roll student whose achievements warranted a distracted "good job, honey," without eye contact. The science fair winner whose trophy was an inconvenience because my brother had finals. The daughter who realized at 17 she'd be paying for college herself. "Your brother's engagement dinner," my father continued, as if my question about my address had been rhetorical. "Kira's parents want to meet the whole family. They're very traditional." Of course. Not a reunion, not a reconnection. Just another image to maintain. A daughter-shaped placeholder at the table to round out the illusion of family. "I won't be there," I said. "What do you mean you won't be there?" His voice sharpened like a blade. "I mean exactly that. I have other plans." "Nora," he said, my name like it was a warning. "This is important for your brother's future. They're high-profile people. It'll reflect badly on us if you don't show up." There it was. Us, not me. Not how I was doing or where I'd been. Just the optics. "I'm not flying across the country for a dinner I wasn't even invited to until now." The silence that followed wasn't quiet at all, but charged like air before a storm. "How dare you?" he finally managed. "That's not how families work." "No," I said, "but it's how ours always has." I hung up. My hand didn't even shake. For a moment, I just sat there in my apartment, letting the silence rush back in. My father had gotten my number from the company directory of the tech firm where I worked, the one connection I couldn't completely sever without changing careers. Then the screen lit up again, missed call, then another, then texts from him, from my mother, then Patrick. I turned off my phone, made myself tea, and stood on the balcony watching the light drain from the sky over the pines. For the first time since the call, I smiled, not out of happiness, but recognition. I knew exactly what would happen next, and for once, I was prepared. By the next morning in my apartment, I'd switched my phone back on to find the texts had escalated from reminders into guilt, and from guilt into threats. By the end of the week, I'd received 6 voicemails, 11 texts, and 2 emails with subject lines like, "Can we talk?" and "Family should stick together." My mother finally called from a different number I didn't recognize. She'd gotten it from my emergency contact at work, my friend Mason, who apologized profusely later. Her voice was tight with restraint, like she was trying to sound warm without dropping the script. "Sweetheart," she said, "this isn't like you. You've always been so respectful. Your brother's counting on you. Kira's parents are formal people. We need to show unity. Unity. A word that means nothing when it's only summoned for guests." "I'm not going," I said simply. "Nora, don't be difficult." "I'm not. I'm being honest." She sighed, frustrated. "It's just one dinner. You don't have to stay long. Smile, say a few words, and then you can disappear again if that's what you want." "You mean like I already have?" I asked. Another silence. Then she hung up. Patrick tried next. His tone was different, less forceful, more confused. "Look, I don't know what's going on between you and Mom and Dad, but can't you just show up for me?" I almost felt something. Almost. But I remembered all the years he looked away while I was overlooked. The birthday parties where my gifts were afterthoughts. The graduation where my parents left early because Patrick had a baseball game. No, I said, not this time. The next day, my father called again. His voice had shed the pretense. If you don't show up to this dinner, he said, you're out of the will. I let the silence stretch just long enough to give him hope I was weighing it. Then I said calmly, clearly, I make more money than all of you combined. I could hear him inhale like he'd been slapped. You're bluffing. If you'd ever asked about my life, I said, you'd know I'm not. He didn't respond. He just hung up. That was the last call I took from him. From that point on, I watched the messages come in like waves. First urgent, then desperate, then angry again. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I opened a new tab on my laptop and clicked back to the real estate listing I'd saved the week before. 3 bedrooms, cedar siding, room for a garden. Nothing big, just mine. Grandma Teresa called the next morning just as the sky turned pink behind the trees. She'd been the only one I'd told about my move to Oregon before leaving, swearing her to secrecy, but making sure she had my new number. She never waited for permission, never checked if I was free. She just called, and I always answered. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, voice steady with that mix of gentleness and knowing. "How's the air up there today?" "Cool and quiet," I said, like I like it. We talked for a few minutes about the lavender I'd planted on the balcony, about the deer that sometimes wandered behind the apartment. Then she paused. "They asked me to call you," she said, not apologizing, just stating the fact. "I figured," I said. "Let me guess. Convince me to come back and play the part?" "They didn't use those words, but yes," she said. "Your mother's been pacing. Your father's in a mood." "They're panicking because they miss me?" I asked, disbelief coloring my tone. She hesitated just long enough. "Because Kira's parents are watching and asking questions." I laughed under my breath. Of course. My value had finally surfaced, tied neatly to someone else's expectations. "I'm not going, Grandma." "I know," she said. "I wouldn't either." That's why I always picked up when she called. She didn't sugarcoat things or make excuses for them. She remembered my birthdays, sent me postcards from her little trips, asked about my job, and actually listened to the answers. She was the only one who ever looked directly at me and saw more than what I could offer. "I just wanted you to hear it from someone honest," she said, "not because I think you owe them anything." "Thank you," I said. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I am," I said, and I meant it. "Really?" I stayed on the phone with her until the tea in my mug went cold. She asked about the house I was looking at and whether I planned to paint the walls or leave them plain. We talked about furniture and fig trees and things that had nothing to do with obligation. The engagement dinner came and went without me. I spent the evening on a trail just outside Lithia Park in Ashland, a small town in southern Oregon where I'd settled, weaving between tall trees and early spring wildflowers. The silence there wasn't empty. It was earned. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wonder what was happening on the other side of the country. When I got home that evening to my apartment, there was a missed call from Grandma Teresa. I called her back before even taking off my boots. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "You enjoying your mountain air?" "Every second," I replied. She exhaled slowly. "Well, the dinner happened." I waited. "It was tense," she said. "The kind of tension that looks polite on the outside but makes your neck stiff just sitting in the same room. Your parents did their best to keep it together, but Rachel couldn't stop fidgeting. Your father barely spoke." "And Kira's mother?" I asked, already knowing. She kept glancing around like she was waiting for someone. "Me?" "Yes, and when she realized you weren't coming, she asked why." I closed my eyes, let the moment land. What did they say? They tried different versions. First they said you were sick, then that work had called you away, then that you were traveling for some conference. All lies. Kira's mother knew it. You could see it in her face. She pressed harder, asked why you hadn't been at the engagement party either, asked why she'd only found out you existed a few weeks ago. My breath caught. And apparently she had a private conversation with your mother after dinner. No one knows exactly what was said, but your mother came out of it pale and quiet. I think she got read like a book. I almost smiled. "What about Patrick?" He looked distracted all night, kept checking the door, never smiled for long. I think Kira's upset too. I don't think her parents bought the family portrait your parents were trying to paint." I sat down at my kitchen table, letting that sink in. Not out of malice, just the kind of satisfaction that comes from truth finally catching up to fiction. "They still think this is about a dinner party," I said. "I know," she replied, "but Kira's parents saw it. Nora, the imbalance, the omissions, the damage." A week after the engagement dinner, Grandma Teresa called again. 2 weeks had passed since my father's first call, and I had just finalized the purchase of my new house. I was in the middle of unpacking a box labeled "Kitchen Fragile" when the phone lit up with her name. "They're still talking about it," she said, without needing to explain what it was. "Kira's parents?" "Yes. They've asked Patrick directly now why you weren't involved, why no one mentioned you until the last minute, why you've disappeared." "And what did he say?" "He tried to downplay it at first, but I think even he's starting to realize this isn't just going away. Kira's mother doesn't like being lied to." I set down a stack of plates and leaned against the counter. Is the relationship already cracking? There's tension. The kind that doesn't fade with fancy dinners. I didn't feel glee. I didn't want things to fall apart for him. I just felt still, like watching ripples in a pond after dropping a single stone. "They've started asking around," Grandma said. "Your parents are trying to find your new number, your address. They even asked me again. You didn't tell them, right?" "Of course not." "I told them if you wanted to talk to them, you would." I breathed out slowly. "Thank you." "They're nervous," she continued. "Not just about you, but about what Kira's parents might do, what they might say, what this might mean for Patrick's future." "They're worried about damage control," I said, "not about me." "Yes," she said quietly, "but they're starting to realize this doesn't just disappear. The way they treated you, it left marks." I looked around my small kitchen. Sunlight on the counters, new dish towels folded by the sink, a window above the stove that overlooked a row of pines. This wasn't just where I lived. It was mine. "They're the ones who disappeared," I said. "They just didn't notice until someone else did." She didn't reply right away, but I could hear the pride in her silence, the kind that never had to be spoken out loud. That night, I finished unpacking the kitchen and lit a candle by the sink. The house already felt like home. 3 days after moving into my new house, I checked my mailbox to find it had come in a plain white envelope, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My father had somehow gotten my address through a private investigator he'd hired, as Grandma would later tell me, his blocky, careful print, like he thought neatness could cover history. I stood at the mailbox for a long moment, the envelope heavy despite its lightness. I didn't bring it inside. I walked straight to the fire pit in the backyard, struck a match, and dropped it in. The paper curled inward, blackened, then disappeared into ash. I already knew how it ended. The next morning, I signed the final paperwork for the house. My name on every line, no cosigner, no conditions, just mine. Mason and Lily texted about flights for next month. They had been my closest friends since college, the ones who helped me plan my escape to Oregon, and now they wanted to see the place and help me plant the first flowers. I'd already cleared a corner of the yard for tomatoes in time. Later that evening, I registered for a graduate course in digital forensics, not because I needed it, just because I could. I changed my phone number the same week. Only a handful of people got the new one. Teresa, my boss, Mason, Lily. That was enough. No more surprise calls, no more texts asking for favors disguised as obligations, no more family dinners where my name was an afterthought. The house was quiet, not lonely, just honest. 6 months later, my backyard was filled with voices and the smell of roasted corn and grilled peaches. Mason was manning the grill like it was a science experiment. Lily balanced a pitcher of sangria in one hand and a stack of mismatched cups in the other. The folding table overflowed with potluck dishes, quiche, sesame noodles, a suspicious-looking casserole someone insisted was a family recipe. A neighbor's golden retriever flopped at my feet. Across the yard, my coworker's daughter, Ellie, tugged at my sleeve and handed me a plastic bracelet she'd made from string. "You're my aunt now," she said solemnly, "but the fun kind." "I'll take that," I said, slipping it on. Later, as twilight settled in, someone I barely knew from the next street over asked, "Do you have family back east?" I didn't hesitate. Not anymore. There was a beat of quiet, and then I smiled, gesturing to the table where Mason was laughing so hard he'd spilled lemonade on his shirt, where Lily was dancing barefoot to a playlist I didn't even know I had. "But I have this," I said, and I meant it. When everyone had left and the yard was quiet again, I gathered the plates, folded the chairs, and stood at the edge of the garden with the string bracelet still on my wrist. Fireflies blinked near the fence. My house glowed softly behind me. It wasn't perfect. It was better. It was mine. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles. Zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.